Hello out there to all the Graham readers turned listeners. We have brought the magazine to life. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you tuned in previously, then you may have met the scientist next to me, Dr. Jackie Salm. Dr. Jackie is tuning in with us today to talk terpenes. Terpenes are an amazing part of not just cannabis, but everything around us. So Dr. Jackie is a natural chemist, and her first introduction into discovering her first terpene was when she was working with the Anti-Malaria Project. And then she spent some time in Antarctica, and she found terpenes in sponges, coral, and algae. Dr. Salm, if you could please tell our audience a little bit about those terpenes that you discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one that you mentioned, we had a big project actually for Medicines for Malaria Ventures, which is supported by the Gates Foundation. And I worked in Professor Bill Baker's lab at the University of South Florida, and we screened tens of thousands of different fungal extracts. So this was all from mostly terrestrial, but some marine, different types of fungi, whichever pronunciation you get on board with. And the very first ones, this was actually some undergraduate research. So it's kind of my introduction to natural products. And I ended up finding a cytotoxic terpene that has, I think, been looked into more for cancer research now because it did have some toxicity to it. But the second terpenes were actually from the Antarctic coral, and those ones are some of my favorites nomenclature-wise because I ended up renamed them the shaggings, and those are always fun for me. And then we had the algal terpenes those were all pretty toxic as well. We did look at them a little bit for Alzheimer's treatment, but for the most part, those were more ecological. So we were really trying to see what they were doing in the environment in the marine area around Palmer Station in Antarctica. And then the sponge was actually probably our biggest hitter. That one was Darwinolide, which it's a diterpene that had promising MRSA biofilm inhibition, so specifically for methicillin resistant staff in the hospitals. And so we did a lot of different research kind of across the board. As you can see, basically if we found a compound, we tried to find anything and everything it could potentially help. We had a pretty open target model where we just wanted to see where it could be useful as a potential drug discovery option. And those were the biggest terpenes that I really focused on through undergrad and then my graduate work for my PhD.
The Darwinolide is fascinating to me, and I know that I've mentioned this to you in our chats before, but as a nurse, MRSA, is awful. And to think that you have found and discovered a compound that could assist MRSA patients is just amazing. It's amazing what is in the natural world that is here for us to assist us. You just have to understand how to pull what compound and when and where.
Right. And it's almost more of like biomimicry at that point, like where the sponge itself uses it as an antibiotic sometimes. I mean, sponges also can get fouled or covered in different bacteria or other organisms. And sometimes they need these as a defense because you're encroaching on their territory a little bit, or maybe you're causing disease like we see with the girls here in Florida all the time, a lot of different viral and bacterial diseases. So they're fighting a lot of the same things that we're fighting sometimes, and sometimes they're different, but at least the way they target them could be the same, so then it helps us in some way. So it's just finding all those different connected, right? It's finding where that connection is. But yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of really neat chemistry out there that is just waiting to be found.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to kind of almost take a step back, can you explain terpenes? I guess we could have started there, but I like to time, so.
Yeah, terpenes are interesting. We use that term a lot kind of as this blanket term, especially because of the cannabis industry now. There's us like super nerdy scientists, we like to emphasize that there are terpenoids and then there are terpenes, and these are actually different things. But they are the largest class of natural compounds that are considered natural products, which what that word really means is these are metabolites, or these are compounds that an organism will produce that aren't necessary for its primary metabolism, which is its main focus of metabolism. So this is stuff that it uses more for like defense or for attracting maybe insects or trying to attract potential mates or pollinators, that sort of thing. Terpenes have really unique properties because we as humans have learned to enjoy them, especially from essential oils. Or, I mean, any pine tree you walk by, that smell, you know, the smell of Christmas. We have the most herbs you use, a lot of different plants, they all put off some kind of aroma. A lot of times, sometimes those are not terpenes or terpenoids, but a lot of the times they are. And that's probably the best way. If you're ever smelling like a lavender essential oil, then you know you're probably sniffing some linalool and other terpenes in there. Terpenoids, that one's a terpenoid, but they, yeah, so they're really everywhere. They and they do lots of different things. So
That's amazing. What is your favorite terpene?
so my answer to that probably would have been one of the ones that I discovered a few years ago. That would have probably been my answer. But I honestly, after being in the cannabis industry, I got so intrigued by the different terpene profiles and trying to study all the different phenotypes and strains of the plant. And we had this one terpene pop up for us, and that was Fujian. And that started to become my favorite over time, just because I was so interested in why it was never even really looked at or focused on. And most people know that terpene from frankincense. So if you've ever heard of frankincense and myrrh, frankincense coming from the Boswellia plant genus, that one is most well known from some of those species of plants, but does pop up in certain strains of cannabis. And it seems to be a good indicator of kind of classes of different plants of cannabis. And so it was always interesting to me because a lot of the third-party labs and a lot of the other places just aren't even testing for it. So that one over time, that one became my favorite just because of its mystery a little bit for me. So that was definitely it.
I look forward to the day when every state mandates and regulates
Yeah.
test for terpenes. It's quite alarming. Those of you who read the magazine, be sure to check out the series that I wrote on the need for testing. I did a whole article on the need for testing terpenes. And can you, now that we're talking about that, can
Yeah.
you tell us why is it important to test cannabis for terpenes? What do terpenes, how do they affect cannabis itself?
So, and unfortunately, the jury is still a little bit out on exactly what they're doing. But terpenes and terpenoids in general, since there are just so many of them, I mean, there's just in cannabis alone, I mean, just dozens and dozens of terpenes that are pretty abundant. So it's not even just like they're only trace tiny amounts. Sometimes they're, you know, fairly compounds in the plant. These things can do a lot of funky stuff, especially throughout the production. So let's say you take just flower. Terpenes and terpenoids can make a big difference on the effects that you get from cannabis just on flower alone. Now, if you take that flower and you extract it, then, you know, multitude of different ways that different places decide to extract it. You process it in different ways, you manufacture it in different ways. All of those processes can affect those terpenes and terpenoids, just like they can affect the cannabinoids, which cannabinoids are actually a part of them is from the terpene scaffold. So biosynthetically, cannabinoids are actually considered a terpenoid, but they get altered in different ways throughout that whole process, and sometimes not in the best ways. Sometimes it might be detrimental. It could be producing something that might be not great for you. Most of the time, especially when it comes to curing, that's a huge time to really change the terpene profiles, and that can also really affect the flavor. It can affect all of these different things, and it's not, that's obviously on like an aesthetic side, just for flavor, or sort of more five senses kind of side, but that's telling you that something changed chemically. If there's a different smell, if there's a different taste, if there's a different even touch, something has changed to the chemistry. Now that we know things like beta caryophyllene or myrcene, some of these other ones, some of them do seem to have an effect, whether it be on different receptors that are in your body, while others, we're still trying to figure out what they're doing. And that's when they're alone. So then take dozens of them all at once with cannabinoids in this one zone, and they're just bouncing off of all these different receptors in your body, doing a bunch of different things. We're still trying to figure out what that is, unfortunately. But thankfully, cannabis is considered very safe to a lot of other things. So for the most part, it's kind of a trial and error. Okay, right now. But I think that for long-term personalized medicine goals or actual standardized medicine goals, it's going to need a lot of work. But from the more recreational perspective, or even medical perspective, but more over the counter kind of medical, I think that's totally fine. It's only once you're getting to something that needs consistency, like epilepsy, or something that really needs something that they can count and rely on, then it'll start to really matter.
I find that incredibly fascinating. I use cannabis daily for really any sign or symptom that I am experiencing. For nausea, that's one of my primary complaints, as is chronic pain from the amount of surgeries that I've had. And I personally resonate with terpenes like caryophyllene and the more spicy type versus a limonene or a pinene even. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, when I don't feel good, if I end up with a limonene, a higher citrus type strain, it will almost make me feel more nauseous. And so
Interesting.
that's something that just I personally have paid attention to over the years of having a medical marijuana card and having, access to medical cannabis. So
Yeah.
I I look forward to the future of and terpene based strains even, and I know breeders right now that are pheno hunting based upon and so it just fascinates me because like you said, in work with epilepsy and even just in daily nausea for people like me, it can be such a game changer because you can grow Blue Dream in Florida and you can grow Blue Dream in Colorado, and those phenotypes are going to end up being completely different. And in one place it might be sativa dominant, and it might it might be indica dominant, but it's technically the same cultivar. So we still so much to learn in the industry. And so thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for the work you're putting into it. Thank you for this education on terpenes today. We greatly appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and for learning something new today. We appreciate you and we appreciate your time. Thank you again, Dr. Jackie.